I guess some people wait until the vows fade, the champagne dries up, and the cameras stop flashing. But not my husband. Maxwell made sure his betrayal came with a spotlight and a standing ovation. I'm Harper Lee. I'm 46 years old, and 3 nights ago at the Grand Gala celebrating the 10th anniversary of my architecture firm, the company I built from nothing, my husband stood on a stage in front of over 300 of New York's most influential business leaders and publicly ended our marriage like it was the closing act of a Broadway show. His exact words? "Harper, I'm moving on. I never loved you. I loved the access." Just like that. Microphone in one hand, bourbon in the other, and not even a flicker of shame on his face. The room went dead silent. No silverware clinking, no polite coughs, just the sound of my heart thudding against my ribs. And you know what I did? I smiled. I stood up, straightened my emerald green dress, the one he insisted I buy because it made me look powerful, and leaned into the mic. "Thank you for finally admitting it, Max. Oh, and everyone, check under your seats." Gasps echoed through the room as people reached down. Under each chair was a sealed envelope with a blood-red wax seal. That's when I walked off that stage, my heels clicking louder than the silence behind me. And just as the heavy doors swung shut, I heard the rip of hundreds of envelopes being opened at once. But let me rewind a bit, because this circus didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was years in the making. You see, Max wasn't always a villain. At least I didn't think he was. I met him 10 years ago, right after I secured the biggest project of my career, a luxury high-rise on Fifth Avenue. I was exhausted, overworked, and honestly, a little lonely. He was charming, funny, and knew exactly how to make me feel seen in a room full of people who only cared about my portfolio. We got married fast. Too fast. And because I thought I was being strategic, we signed a prenup. He had nothing to his name back then, just a trail of failed startups and a shiny smile. But the prenup wasn't about money. It was about keeping things clean. A safety net for both of us. At least that's what I told myself. Max never really built anything. He drifted between consulting gigs, name-dropped people he barely knew, and slowly wormed his way into my professional circles. Before I realized it, he was speaking on behalf of my company at industry events, hosting investment dinners under my firm's name, charming everyone from real estate moguls to senators' wives. And me? I played the good sport, smiling through the discomfort, believing that partnership meant sacrifice. But the real gut punch came 3 months ago. My executive assistant flagged a series of unusual partnership agreements filed under our business. Small things at first. Minor equity shares gifted to strategic partners. When I dug deeper, the names attached to those shares were all connected to Max. His college buddies, his sister, even his personal trainer. I confronted him, of course. He laughed it off. "It's called playing the long game, Harper. You wouldn't understand." That night, while he was sleeping off his latest bourbon-fueled networking event, I found the documents on his laptop. He wasn't just slowly slicing pieces of my company away. He was using my own resources to build a shadow firm under a shell company called Everbright Ventures. And guess what? Their primary objective? To push me out of my own board. He didn't plan to just leave me. He planned to replace me. And I let him get that far. But here's the thing about me. Max underestimated one critical flaw in his master plan. I read everything. The contracts, the fine print, the loyalty clauses, including the one he forgot he signed, buried deep in that prenup, about conflict of interest and financial sabotage, the clause that would bring his little empire crumbling down. And the best part? He had no idea what was actually inside those red-sealed envelopes. But he was about to find out. Because as I stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, my phone buzzed. One line from my attorney. "SEC received the full dossier. You're officially one step ahead." I thought walking out of that gala would be the hardest part. Turns out, surviving what came after was the real test. The morning after Max's grand performance, I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. texts, missed calls, emails. The headlines hit before my coffee even finished brewing. Empire of Deceit. Maxwell Reed's web of financial manipulations exposed. Architectural queen pin outsmarts husband's hostile takeover attempt. And just like that, my private humiliation became very public entertainment. My inbox was flooded with messages from so-called friends, people who'd clinked glasses with me the night before while knowing damn well Max was circling like a vulture over my life's work. Their messages ranged from, "Are you okay?" to "We should grab coffee and talk about how you're handling this PR crisis." Translation? They were all just sniffing around for a front row seat to my downfall. But the worst message wasn't from them. It was from Max. One simple line. "I told you I always win, Harper." That's when it really hit me. Max wasn't just some misguided dreamer who lost his way. He was calculated, cold. And somehow, despite everything I'd exposed, he still believed he had the upper hand. See, what I didn't mention in part 1 is that Max had already set up his new beginning before the gala. He had a penthouse lease signed under his new company's name. The same penthouse he promised to the investors he seduced with my designs, my name, and my legacy. And here's the gut punch. He didn't plan to live there alone. Enter Isla Monroe, 29 years old, a financial influencer with 1 million followers and a carefully curated Instagram life. The same Isla who interviewed me 6 months ago on her podcast about empowered women building empires. Yeah, her. Turns out the podcast wasn't about celebrating me. It was about studying me. I found out through one of my junior architects, bless his gossip-hungry heart, that Max and Isla had been parading around the penthouse that very night, already planning the rebranding of my company under their shiny new venture. They called it Elevation Collective. Their pitch? A modern architectural movement inspired by sustainable luxury and the freedom of new beginnings. Freedom. What a sick joke. By noon, I was sitting alone in the corner booth of a tiny cafe I used to escape to back when I was just starting out, before the boardrooms and the red carpet events. I sat there, replaying every conversation, every moment I had chosen to stay quiet instead of standing up for myself. And that's when my attorney, Philip, called. "You're going to want to sit down for this one," he started. Apparently, Max had filed a countersuit that morning, claiming that I had violated our prenup by creating a hostile work environment and emotionally coercing him during our marriage, which, according to him, forced him to seek financial independence in creative ways. Creative ways? You mean fraud, Max? But here's the real kicker. Attached to his lawsuit were statements from people I thought were my friends, colleagues, investors, even my former COO, claiming I had become impossible to work with, and that Max had been the stabilizing force behind my success. They were helping him rewrite my entire legacy. It felt like drowning while watching people I trusted hand him the buckets to drain my ship. I wanted to fall apart right there in that cafe. But then, something shifted. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. And there it was, the overlooked detail Max hadn't counted on. A forwarded email thread from 6 months ago. An internal conversation between Max and his so-called partners at Everbright Ventures. Subject line? Operation Swan Song. In that thread, Max laid out everything. The hostile takeover plan, the staged gala announcement, even the financial documents he forged to manipulate my investors. And right at the end, one sentence that sent a chill through my bones. After this, Harper won't have the strength to fight. She always folds when it gets personal. That was his mistake. I hit forward and sent the entire thread to Philip. Then I stood up, walked out of that cafe, and for the first time in weeks, I actually smiled. Because Max wasn't just about to lose everything. He was about to learn what happens when a woman stops folding. By the time the court date rolled around, my heart wasn't just broken. It was armored. Or at least, that's what I told myself walking into that sterile courtroom with my attorney, Philip, by my side. Max was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table like he owned the place. Slicked back hair, tailored suit, fake calm painted all over his smug face. But the bags under his eyes told a different story. I guess sleepless nights hit harder when your empire is built on sand. I kept my head high, but every step toward that table felt like dragging a 100-pound weight behind me. When the judge entered, the entire room snapped to attention. Judge Walters was notorious, sharp as a blade and allergic to BS perfect. Max's lawyer, some high-priced snake in a designer tie, launched into a long, dramatic speech about how my emotional volatility created a toxic work environment. How poor Max was driven to alternative financial strategies just to survive the oppressive reign of a controlling, cold-hearted woman. I swear, if eye-rolling were a felony, I'd have been cuffed before he finished his opening statement. Then it was Philip's turn. And man, he didn't just play defense. He flipped the whole damn table. He laid out the paper trail of hidden accounts, the forged partnership agreements, and then, like a magician pulling the final card, he dropped the Operation Swan Song emails right into evidence. Max's lawyer visibly paled. Max's hands tightened into fists. But Judge Walters? She didn't even blink. Just adjusted her glasses and said, "Mr. Reed, is there any part of this detailed plan you'd like to dispute before I make my ruling?" Max stood up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. And then it happened. The moment I wasn't prepared for. He didn't deny it. He smiled. I'll never forget what he said next. "Your Honor, the only mistake I made was underestimating just how ruthless Harper could be. But let's be honest, she learned it from the best." My stomach dropped. The courtroom blurred for a second. And then he said it. The twist I didn't see coming. "Tell them, Harper. Tell them about the real reason you're so good at spotting betrayal. About how your father did the exact same thing to your mother. How he walked out and left you both penniless. You've just been waiting to finish his unfinished fight ever since." The room went ice cold. My knees almost buckled. Because it was true. And nobody in that courtroom knew it. Not the board members, not the investors, not even Philip. I had spent my entire life pretending that part of my story didn't exist. That the terrified girl watching her mother beg my father to stay wasn't still living inside me somewhere. But Max knew. And in that moment, he weaponized it. My heart felt like it cracked right down the middle. And the worst part? For a split second, I felt like that girl again. Small. Helpless. Left behind. If you're still reading this and you've ever sat in a room full of people, surrounded by eyes and expectations, while someone aired out the darkest corner of your life for sport, just know, I see you. I am you. And though it feels impossible right now, I swear there's a version of you out there who stands up anyway, who looks that betrayal dead in the eye and says, "Not today. Not anymore." And that's exactly what I did next. I wish I could tell you that after Max tried to gut me in that courtroom, I fell apart quietly and moved on gracefully. But that's not what happened. I went home, locked the door, and absolutely lost it. Smashed a wine glass against the sink, screamed into a pillow until my throat went raw. I hated him. Hated myself more for letting it get this far. But once the storm passed, something inside me clicked. Like a gear finally grinding into place after years of misalignment. I wasn't going to fight this war on his terms. No more courtroom theatrics. No more letting him pull my strings like I was still some wide-eyed woman grateful he stuck around. I was done playing defense. The next morning, I made exactly 3 phone calls. First was to Philip. I told him to pause all public statements. We weren't going to defend my reputation anymore. We were going to own it. Second was to my old college professor, Dr. Celine Moore, the woman who taught me everything about contract law and corporate governance. She picked up on the first ring. "Harper, I was wondering when you'd finally stop surviving and start fighting." That woman always had impeccable timing. She reminded me of a little-known clause buried deep in corporate restructuring law, something Max's shiny legal team clearly overlooked. A shareholder-initiated ethical review hearing. In plain English, I had the right to call an emergency board meeting, not to debate finances, but to review whether a senior stakeholder, namely Max, had violated the company's ethical standards. And if the board voted in favor, Max could be forcibly removed from his own venture, Elevation Collective, even before it officially launched. So I made the third call. To every single woman Max had ever underestimated. Former employees he dismissed. Young female architects whose ideas he stole and presented as his own. Investors' wives he charmed at cocktail parties but talked down to behind closed doors. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I asked for their stories, their receipts, their silence to finally end. And, God, did they deliver. Emails, recordings, handwritten notes from strategy meetings where he literally said, "No one takes a woman in power seriously unless she's a villain or a victim. Harper's too soft to play either." By the time the emergency board meeting was scheduled, I had compiled a dossier so thick it needed its own leather binder. I walked into that room like I owned it. Because I did. Max, ever the showman, strutted in 10 minutes late with Isla Monroe on his arm, like this was just another photo op. He sat directly across from me, smirked, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Round 2, sweetheart." I opened the binder, laid it flat on the table, looked him dead in the eye. "No, Max. Final round." One by one, I presented the evidence. The backdoor deals, the verbal abuse caught on tape, the financial coercion, and then the masterstroke. Proof that Max had falsified Isla's financial qualifications to list her as a senior advisor, inflating investor confidence under false pretenses. Isla's face went pale. She turned to him, eyes wide. "You told me that was just a placeholder title." Max's smirk cracked. The board voted unanimously. Effective immediately, Max Reed was permanently barred from any leadership position within Elevation Collective. His shares? Frozen pending a legal review of fraudulent activity. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, that's when I dropped the final bombshell. I stood, took a deep breath, and revealed that the majority stake of Elevation Collective had been quietly purchased 3 weeks prior by a private trust. A trust I now controlled. Max wasn't just out of the company. I owned it. The look on his face? Like watching a skyscraper collapse in slow motion. And in that moment, standing in a room full of the very people who once doubted me, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. If you're still reading this, sitting in the middle of your own storm, wondering if the ground will ever stop shifting beneath your feet, just know, it will. And when it does, you'll be standing taller than you ever thought possible. When you've spent years holding your breath, you forget what it feels like to finally exhale. The final hearing wasn't in some grand courtroom. It was a small, nondescript chamber on the 4th floor of the municipal building. Fitting, really. Quiet, clinical. Like the perfect place to end a war without fanfare. Max sat across from me, but the man I saw that day wasn't the one who'd strutted across stages and whispered poison into boardrooms. His suit hung loose on him. His hair, always meticulously styled, was now streaked with gray at the temples. His hands shook when he tried to pour himself a glass of water. The judge didn't waste time. "Final ruling on the division of assets and all pending legal actions," she began. Her voice didn't rise or fall. It just cut straight through the air like a blade. Max lost everything. The assets hidden under shell companies, frozen and liquidated, the penthouse he promised to Isla, repossessed and auctioned off to cover legal fees, and that shiny new company, Elevation Collective, still mine. But what hit hardest wasn't the financial ruin. It was when the judge read the final condition aloud. "Mr. Reed is prohibited from holding executive roles or financial advisory positions for a minimum of 10 years. Any violations will result in immediate incarceration." Max's career wasn't just over. His name, his so-called legacy, was permanently stamped with public disgrace. When it was over, he stood up, avoided my eyes, and walked straight out of the room. No last word, no parting shot. Just gone. And in that silence, I realized closure isn't loud. It's the sound of a door finally closing and knowing you'll never open it again. Months passed. Elevation Collective became something real, something good. We shifted focus toward mentorship programs for young women in architecture and design. The board meetings that once drained me became brainstorming sessions filled with people who actually cared. And me? I took time. Real time. Walks at sunset without checking my phone. Wine nights with women who'd lived their own wars and survived. And eventually, I stood on my own stage. Not to defend myself, but to tell my story on my terms. Funny, isn't it? Max always said no one listens to a woman unless she's a villain or a victim. Turns out there's a third option. We become the author of our own ending. The lesson I learned, power isn't about control. It's about freedom. The freedom to choose yourself when no one else will. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, whether you're still in the fight or standing in the aftermath. And if this hit a little too close to home, stick around. Sometimes hearing someone say, "I survived," is exactly what we need to start believing it's possible.